All right, hello everyone. I was going to sit patiently and wait for 180 seconds, but it turned out that I couldn't do that. So we're here slightly early, and we will wait until 11 before actually doing anything interesting. But welcome to the next episode of Let's Make a Language. I'm very much looking forward to talking about a bunch of stuff today, but I'm going to helpfully refrain from saying anything important until 11 when people are going to be here. At least I hope. I got a bit of feedback on the last episode that said that people enjoyed it, which is great. I'm really looking forward to it. I didn't get any complaints about timing, so my plan for right now is still 11s on every other Saturday for 2 hours. Please, if you don't like this time, just let me know. So now we get to spend the next 120 seconds staring at the clock together as we wait for it to be the appointed time. Because I'm very excited, but I wouldn't want my excitement to get in the way of people who have things to do right up until 10:59. So now we get to wait. But in all seriousness, I'm really looking forward to doing this. And I'd appreciate if someone, I don't know if anyone's watching yet, if someone would put something in the chat when they start watching, because that would be helpful. But either way, this is the second episode of Let's Make a Language. I'm so excited. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that I want to talk about today. I realized last time when we were talking about phonology that I completely forgot to mention stress and also tone. And so I figure those are probably a good place to start, especially because if we don't tackle stress early, it's going to tend to be Englishy, just because English has some very complicated patterns of stress that people become accustomed to. So, okay. I've not seen anyone put anything in the chat. So for all I know, I'm now monologuing to an empty room. But yeah, according to my clock, we've got 30 seconds left. So then once 30 seconds has passed, I'll welcome everyone again. Yeah, it's a lovely Saturday. It's very hot where I am, and I can't have our friend the AC running because our friend the AC is very loud. So if I look a little bit sweaty, it's because I am making sure to stay hydrated in order to stay cool. All right, but now my clock says that it's 11, and that means that I can start. I am so glad that everyone has joined me. Again, since I didn't get any feedback about timing, I was told people like the series, the stream, but I wasn't told anything about timing, so I'm just gonna plan to go for another 2 hours, and we'll see how it goes. All right, so jumping right into it, stress, tone. Oh, good, we have people in the chat, so I know I'm being heard. Hi, Sparrow. Oh, good. So, stress and tone. What is stress? Stress is where you put the emphasis within a word, and as in many things, English does it weirdly. Most languages either have explicitly marked stress or a very regular pattern of stress. So, for example, Spanish, emphasis is always on the second to last syllable. Or if it's not on the second to last syllable, you indicate that with an accent mark. English doesn't do that. English, you can have words that are actually distinguished only by their stress. I have the Wikipedia page on that up here. But it's things like record versus record, or permit versus permit. Those are the same sounds, but there's different stress. And stress can be indicated in a few different ways. In English, it's indicated both by how loudly you say each syllable, but also by very subtle changes to the vowels that make up the syllable. So, for example, earlier I said record and record. If you listen to record, I told you it was the same sounds. That was a lie. Record, the second syllable's vowel, it's not an O of record, it's an of record, And that's because the main way that English distinguishes stress is by reducing vowels in unstressed syllables, which means saying them more like schwa, more like that sound. Schwa is the sound for the most relaxed vowel. If you just like relax your face and then push air through it, that's a schwa. So what do we know? We know stress can be indicated by vowel changes, can be indicated by loudness. There are other languages, like for example Japanese, that indicate stress with pitch changes. This is slightly different from tonal systems, which we'll talk about later. Japanese uses what's called a pitch accent system, which means that the emphasized syllable has a different pattern of pitches than the other syllables. Sparrow says, with approximant consonants, is the inherent vowel noise always a schwa? Ooh, that's a great question. So approximant consonants are things like, ol, y, that we talked about. They're in our chart from last time, actually. And I've made my window too small to see the chart properly, but these are the approximate consonants that we picked, and there's others that you can do. So the question is, do they have an inherent vowel noise that's always a schwa? I don't think so, and here's why. Here's where we come to the Daric makes funny sounds part of the whole experience. If I say something like li or ri, I don't hear any schwa there. It seems kind of natural to insert a schwa. Like, for example, if I had a word that ended on one of those, like if I had something that, like, cool, when I release the ul at the end of cool, there's a little tiny schwa there. Cool. But if it's in the middle of a word with an actual vowel that you say coming after it, like in like, I don't think there's a schwa there. So no, schwas and approximant consonants are not always the same thing, but if for whatever reason you need to insert a vowel, like for example, at the end of a word, if you need a vowel just because you haven't stopped pushing air through your face yet, the vowel that is mostly inserted in cases like that is the schwa, because it's maximally relaxed and indistinct. So, okay, I hope that answers the question. What was I talking about? Oh, right, I was talking about different ways to indicate stress, right? And so some languages do that with vowel changes, little subtle ones. Some languages do that with how loudly you say the syllable. Some languages do that with tone, or, sorry, not tone, but pitch, like whether you say a syllable higher or lower. And I'm sure there are probably others that I'm missing. But every language does it in some ways or another, and stress is used in kind of two distinct ways. Like some words, like the stress is actually a component of distinguishing that word from other words, like record versus record. But you can also use stress to subtly change meaning. Like, for example, if we think about the sentence, I saw your bike, if I put the stress on different words, that sentence means different things. Like, I saw your bike. I saw your bike. I saw your bike. I saw your bike, right? I'm putting the emphasis on different words, and it changes the meaning. And I'm not going to talk about that particular use of stress yet. I just want to talk about stress within words. Because if we don't think about how stress within words works in this language, then probably by default we'll end up saying it with our English intuitions of how words are supposed to be stressed, because English's stress rules are not explicitly marked and not consistent, because English has a long history of stealing words and pronunciations from other languages, which means that there's no underlying pattern that holds true for all of English. Now, I say that, I'm sure people will immediately want to point out patterns. I'm not saying that it's impossible to describe English, I'm just saying that the stress rules are way more complex than most languages. Okay, so enough about what stress is. What do we want stress to be like? Well, to help with that, after last episode, when we had talked about phonology, I came up with a bunch of syllables and a bunch of words made according to the phonological rules that we had picked. And I did this for two reasons. One, because I think that we probably need more sound changes to make the language really sound smooth and nice. And I want to use these as a way to discuss that. But also so that later when we're talking about derivational morphology, which is what I want to be the main topic for this broadcast, I cannot wait to talk about derivational morphology. But so that when we get there, we have like some words to play with. But for right now, I'm just going to look at these words and try to read them to you and show how you can stress one syllable or the other, and then we can talk about what rule we want to use. So, before we get too far into things, though, this has always been supposed to be like, let us make a language, us together. So your assignment for this particular broadcast is anytime I say a word, try saying it with me. And if you don't like it for any reason, like if you don't like how it sounds, if you don't like how hard it is to say, if you don't like it because it reminds you of your mother, let me know in the chat so that we can change it. Because if I just sit up here and say words at you, that's not nearly as fun as if we say words together. So, okay. All that said, here's some words, right? So we've got words like chmasnagek, which I admit I started out with a funny one because who doesn't like saying chmasnagek? So then the question is, what does that word sound like with the stress in different positions? Well, if we think about putting the stress on the first syllable, that would be like chmasnagek, which is what I've been saying. But if we put the stress on the second syllable, maybe that's something more like chmasnagek? Chmasnagek? I don't know. Since it's not a English word because it contains lots of non-English sounds, I'm not convinced that our intuitions about how the vowels would change really has too much of an impact there. So let's think about that and come back to it. Let's go through all these words, saying them. So next up, we've got a word like casipia, and that's three syllables, right? So we could do casipia, casipia, or casipia. And so there you're starting to be able, I hope, to be able to hear the things. Sparrow says, what if we break between the S and the kind of N? Ooh, good question. So first of all, I should really know the name for that character. It's on the tip of my tongue. Hold on, I'm gonna look it up because it'll be embarrassing not to remember what that's called. Thank you, it's called eng. So what if we break the syllables in this first word between the S and the eng? So that would be like chmasnagek, or chmasnagek. Yeah, okay, that's better. Now I can hear it. Chmasnagek versus chmasnagek, which is still a fun word to say. So, okay, yeah, good point. And that actually brings us to another topic, which I'm going to put aside for later, which is how you actually break words into syllables. Because last time we talked about what structure we would want syllables to have and some rules for what sounds could go together. But we didn't talk about when you've got a more complicated syllable rule like this, how do you actually break things apart into syllables? And it turns out that when you've got grammar changes that act on syllables, or when you've got stress rules that act on syllables, how you do that is important. So again, we'll talk about it later. So, okay. Chmasnagek, casipia. This next one would be like kolef. So that would be like kolef or kolef. Then and again, when I say these things, I'm trying to like emphasize the difference so you can hear it. Stress in everyday speech can actually be pretty subtle, and you'll also see real speakers of a language will change the stress depending on the larger context that they're saying a word in here. So I'm not saying like thou must say it this way. I'm saying let's think about the stress. Okay. Am I talking too fast? I think I'm talking too fast. What else have we got for words, though? We've got words like piansich, or so that could be piansich or piansich. And then we've got words like misipeta. So that could be misipeta, 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 or misipeta. Adrian says, I am not. I'm not speaking too fast. Excellent. Okay, so I just read through those words. I read through them with different stresses, and hopefully you can hear how stress does change how the word is pronounced. So what stress rule do we want to pick? Now, we could go with a stress rule that has grammatical meaning, like in English, where you've got record and record being two different words, but I'm not so sure about that because I feel like that might make it harder for people to read, and especially if we start throwing, we've already introduced new characters for all the vowels, right? So like, if you look at this O with a line through it, which I also forget the name for, that's I. And if you don't get used to that, I mean, once you get used to it, you can just read it, kolev, right? But if you're not used to it and you just look at that word, you don't really have an idea how it's said. Grace Alden says, did we ever decide how T is articulated in this language? You're using a labiopalatal T, but that's a very English characteristic. Yes. Good point. I don't remember. Okay, so yeah, looking at this, looking at the chart that we put together, I put T down under alveolar, which I think is corresponding to what Grace means by labiopalatal, right? Because to go back to when we were talking about phonology, you got the different points of articulation, labio meaning lip and dental meaning teeth. So a labiodental T is like a Spanish T where you go ta, ta, whereas the alveolar ridge is the ridge of like gum tissue right behind your teeth. So an alveolar T is more like ta, ta, which is a more English T. Grace says, sorry, meant palatal. Palatal. I'm not actually sure. Palatal? I'll figure it out. Yeah, so okay, so the answer is I put down a more English-like T instead of a Spanish-like T, but I'm not particularly attached to that. Grace says it's palatal, I think. Yeah, that sounds right. I feel like I get less intelligent the moment I get on camera and explain things because I feel pressured to like put my sentences in order, but that's okay. What I was saying is we've got, I put down here an Englishy T, right? But I'm not attached to that. If we want to change to a more Spanish-like ta, that's totally acceptable. Sparrow of Doom says, this is fun, no fretting? Yes, I absolutely agree. And we could even have both, right? Like some languages, I don't actually know of any languages that do this off the top of my head, but there's no reason that a language couldn't have two separate T sounds and distinguish them, right? Like we could distinguish ta from ta. So if we had a word like talman, that could be a different word than thalman. Now, I don't think that's a particularly good idea, just because those sounds are so close to each other, but there's no reason we couldn't make the distinction. And the International Phonetic Alphabet, if you remember the chart from last time, this is one, of all of the sounds that people can make. This was a simplified chart that just showed T as being under both dental and alveolar. But there, if you look at the full chart, which I think, was on the Wikipedia page. If you look at the full chart, you'll see that there's actually a bunch of additional diacritic marks and things that you can do, including, sorry, let me make this bigger because I cannot read that from here. Oh, but it's not going to let me zoom in while we're in the image. So can we look at the image itself? Yes, there we go. Okay, so if we look at these diacritic marks, you'll see that there's actually a diacritic mark for dental, which is this little under the letter, like downward facing square bracket thing. So if you are trying to keep your notes straight and you want to distinguish between a Spanish T and an English T, well, that's how you can do it in the IPA. So, okay. Bill NXMon says, this is super fun. Discovered this literally yesterday via Writerspace and watched your first episode a couple of times yesterday. That is excellent. I'm so glad. I'm astonished that you watched it multiple times. I didn't even watch it multiple times, but I'm glad that it was enjoyable, and I really hope that you're having fun following along. Okay, so I was sidetracked talking about T's. Well, what was I talking about before T's? Oh, right, I was talking about picking a pattern of stress. So as I was explaining, we've already got new characters for vowels, and I like to think of, when you're designing a language, I like to use this concept of a strangeness budget. You actually have the same concept in programming language design. The idea is that you want your language to be different from English, because if it's not different from English, then you could just use English, right? Like, there's a whole slew of fantasy that's written just using no languages, or just Old English, or just other existing languages, and that's fine. But, like, we're creating a language, we don't want to create something that already exists, you want it to be different, so okay, fine. But at the same time, if it's too alien, it becomes unusable for reasonable things. Like, a great example of that, in, I think it's Heinlein's books, there's this concept of speed talk, which is a language where every single phoneme means something. Sparrow says, except the language it's written in. Yes, true. You cannot write a book with 0 languages in it, or if you did, it would be a very good picture book. I meant no, like, yeah, I meant no languages other than what it's written in. Okay. But in Heinlein's books, for example, there's this concept of speed talk, where every single phoneme has a different meaning associated with it, and they're all used in the language. And in fact, someone made a conlang called Ethqueel, which, if you're interested in seeing what really weird languages look like, I think Ethqueel is an excellent idea. Ethqueel is essentially speed talk. It uses every single phoneme. It assigns distinct meanings to every possible pattern of phonemes, and this results in some wacky things. Like, I don't have time to go through the thing, but there's an example of a single word in Ethqueel that means, on the contrary, I think that this very big mountain range might at some point trail off. Which, you know, is a word that you're only going to need in very particular circumstances. And, yeah, so you can do something like that. What's the downside of doing that? Well, the downside of doing that is that your language becomes basically impossible to use correctly, right? Like, it becomes difficult to spell and difficult to pronounce. So when you're designing a language, you need to keep in mind, who are you designing it for, and where do you want to spend your strangeness budget? Like, because you want to spend your strangeness budget where it will make the most impact, either like artistically or most mind-bendingly, right? You don't want to spend your strangeness budget on things that aren't going to make speaking and using the language more interesting. So, that's why I want a regular stress rule, because if we had an irregular stress rule, then you got 2 ways to do that, right? Like, either the stress rule is like English, it's implicit and you have to learn it, and that makes it difficult for people to learn. Or it's like Spanish, and it's explicitly marked. And there's nothing wrong with explicitly marking stress, but we've already introduced, like, 3 new vowel characters and this new roundedness, unroundedness vowel distinction that English doesn't have. And so I don't want to put X marks on top of all of these new vowels to indicate things. I feel like that might be just a little strangeness when we don't really need it, because simple stress rules are more common and work perfectly well. So, okay. So which simple stress rule will we pick? You think I've spent 20 minutes talking about stress? You think it would be a big deal? I'm going to say it doesn't actually matter all that much, as long as it's something consistent. I'm kind of fond of Spanish's stress rule, which is second to last syllable, because I think that it works pretty well. But I find, as a personal preference, when I'm reading words in an unfamiliar language, I tend to put the stress on the first syllable, so I'm kind of tempted to go along with that. BLNX Mon says, or it was Thursday for Writer Space. Sorry, I have a 3 and 5-year-old home and time has become meaningless to me. Oh, no need to respond to me or distract you. Well, no, the whole reason, well, A, I've just fixed it so I won't need to lean out of camera in order to read the ends of people's sentences. And B, the whole reason that I'm doing this as a broadcast instead of as me monologuing to a microphone for a podcast is because I think that this is more fun if I can make sure that people are engaged and I can respond to questions. So please interrupt. This isn't a lecture. This is us making a language together. So, okay. Stress rules. So as I said, I feel like putting the stress on the first syllable is kind of easiest, so that's what I'm tempted to go with, unless anyone has particular thoughts. And if you do, put them in the chat. But for now, let's until we see people's responses, let's go with that as our first idea. And remember, like phonology, we can come back and we can refine any of this, because like the other thing about making a language is it's kind of difficult to know what the best choice is ahead of time. So often I'll find myself picking something and then diving further into the language and then figuring out that that makes the language a little bit awkward and having to backtrack and revise a decision. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Although if you get caught in a loop and you keep doing that over and over, you might never finish. But there's nothing wrong with that in moderation. So, okay. For now, let's go with stress on the first syllable, like in French. So these words are chmasnegek, kusipia, kolof, piansich, and nisipeta. Okay, cool. So that's stress. Now, unless people have questions, I'm done talking about it. I didn't even expect it to take 20 minutes. What else do I want to talk about today, though? Well, as I said, the main block of time today I want to spend on derivational morphology, but I feel like I would be missing something if I didn't take the chance to talk about tones, because tones are kind of similar to stress in some ways, but different. So I mentioned that Japanese indicates stress through pitch, but that's like a pitch contour over the course of the whole word. Now, I don't speak Japanese, so I'm going to butcher anything I try as an example horribly, but we can do our own examples in a moment. Belenexmond, and let me know if I'm pronouncing your names in the chat right, says, how much does the stress of a language become influenced by the backstory of the people? Oh, sorry, hit enter right as you said you were done. That's a reminder, it takes time for my computer to encode the video stream and send it to you, and for your computers to decode it. So I am about 16 seconds or so in the past from where you are. So if you interrupt me with a message, that is okay, because there's kind of no way not to do that. But to answer the actual question, how much does the stress of the language become influenced by the backstory of the people? That's a great question. I hadn't thought about it specifically, but let me think out loud about it for a moment. So some languages, like English, are kind of the result of a bunch of languages all having pieces stolen from each other, right? Like we start off with like an old Germanic language, and then it somehow gets to England or somehow gets to Angland, where it's spoken by the Angles, which is the most fun word to say. And then it picks up pieces from, Norse raiding parties and adventures to France and so on. Right, Sparrow says, and then you get a Norse mother-in-law. Exactly. And so you pull in parts from all these other languages, and over time it changes to become Old English and now English. And you've got, because of that, words from many different sources. So a language like that, where the people have had contact with a lot of different cultures, a language like that is going to probably have more irregularities everywhere, but in the stress rule in particular, because that's what we're talking about right now. Whereas if you have a language that maybe wasn't so exposed and didn't steal so much, like that descended from an ancestor language relatively purely, maybe it would have a more regular rule. Because the other thing about languages is languages change over time, and especially languages their irregularities get worn down over time, because anytime there's an exception to the rule, people will just gradually start to forget about it or not do it, and the language will change until now there's no more exception. So languages which have descended for a long time in the same place without lots of contact that, with groups who speak different languages, they're more likely to have regular stress rules. So yes, stress does depend on the history of the language in that sense. As for whether a particular stress pattern, like whether you stress the first syllable or the last syllable, I don't see how that could be influenced by the history of the language. But maybe I'm just not thinking of something, and maybe it'll come back to me later. So yeah, so if you're making a language, you should maybe have a basic sketch of who it is that speaks it, because there are some things like that change it. And I think I mentioned in the first episode, when I was coming up with the concept for this whole broadcast thing, I came up with a little culture. I have some cultural notes that we'll talk about maybe later when they're relevant, of isolated people in a mountain valley area who are going to be the speakers of this language. So yeah, that's another thing that would point us towards using a more regular stress rule, because they've been isolated for a long time. Okay, right. So excellent. That was a great question. Let me think. What was I? Oh, right. I was talking about tones. I love this. I really love being able to answer people's questions. But tones. So I already told you that Japanese uses pitch contour within a word to indicate where stress is falling. Some languages, like for example Mandarin or Vietnamese, use the pitch within a particular syllable or even within the whole word to actually indicate meaning, right? Like, so famously, Mandarin has 4 different words, like ma, and ma, which are all the same phonemes, right? They're both ah, but they're 4 different words because they're distinguished by the contour of the pitch at which you say the syllable, right? So let me see if I can find a nice diagram of that. Mandarin. Yeah, perfect. Tone contours. This is not very big. Okay, that's okay. Right, so Mandarin has 4 tones, right? You can have either like a high constant tone, a rising tone, a falling tone, or a kind of curvy tone where you dip down in the middle. Now, that's not the only tone system, right? Like Cantonese, which is related to Mandarin, but they diverged a while ago. Cantonese, I think, has 9 tones, and Vietnamese has something like 11, which is alarming, to say the least, right? Because this is something that's very much not a feature of Western languages. It's way more common in Eastern languages. In fact, if we go and we look at the World Atlas of Language Structures, which I mentioned last time as an excellent research place to see what is common across different languages, let's take a look at tone where languages use it. And so you can see white here means no tones, and then the other languages are divided into simple and complex tone systems. So if you look, there's really only 2 clusters of places on the Earth where tone systems are really common, although there are a few scattered examples in other places. Like, apparently Latvian. I didn't know that. That's cool. But most European languages and even most Slavic languages, no tone. So, okay. If you want to design a language with tone, that is absolutely great, and I think that you definitely should. But once again, since we're choosing where to spend our strangeness budget, I'm not going to do tone because I have to read all of these things out loud, and I'm certain I would make mistakes, and that would make everything worse. Because people who grew up speaking tonal languages find it a lot easier, and that's true to some degree for every feature that can be part of a language, right? If you grew up with it, it's easier to both distinguish and produce. And obviously with practice, you can get over that. But still, tone is one of the more extreme ways that languages differ from each other, and I don't particularly want to focus on that. Although, obviously, if we are working on the language and we come across like a specific situation where we say, oh, you know what would work really well here is a tone system, then we can come back and add it. But for now, I'm just going to mention tones exist. You can do really cool things with them. There's this concept of tone santai, which is where tones of adjacent syllables actually can influence each other. So if you're interested in it, it's a fascinating topic that you should look up. I'm just not going to do it here. So, okay. Those were the two preliminary things that I wanted to talk about today to really flesh out what we said about phonology last time, right? So now we've talked about stress, we've talked about tone. What are we going to talk about next? Well, next is one of my favorite topics in linguistics, derivational morphology. And I know that that sounds kind of scary and highfalutin and so on, but it's actually really easy because morphology just means like the shape of words, like morph, how words change. And you use morphology all over the place, right? Like there's an overall morphology for the language, which says how words can be shaped. There can be grammatical morphology, which is how words change in response to grammar. Derivational morphology is how words change to make related words. So for example, we have this suffix in English that you can stick on things, monger, right? So if I'm a fishmonger, then I'm someone who like deals in fish and my trade is in fish and I sell fish to people. If I'm a warmonger, then, you know, my business is war and I bring war to people. And there's no reason that you couldn't throw that suffix onto other words. We don't do it commonly, but you could have a firemonger, right? Or I don't know, island monger who sells islands to people. And even if you haven't heard the word before, if you know the pattern, bookmonger. Yes, Sparrow says that you can have a bookmonger. Exactly. If you speak English and know about some of these monger words, then if I run up to you and say giraffe monger, well then, you know, that's alarming, and you might wonder why I just grabbed you by the shoulders and yelled giraffe monger at you. But you at least have some idea of what that might mean because it's related to existing words. Grace says platypus monger and Adrian says carpet monger. Yes, exactly. The point is it's a pattern. And I use monger as an example there because it's one of the more uncommon patterns, so it's easier to see places where it doesn't apply or places where we don't normally use it but we could use it. Pokemonger. Ha, yes. But there are also really common derivational patterns. Like, for example, you think about adding ly to something to turn it into an adverb. That's grammatical morphology, not derivational morphology. But if you... hold on, I lost my train of thought. Let me think about a derivational... Oh, right. Or like tacking on ESE on the ends of things to make languages, like, you know, Russianese and Australiaese, right? Like, obviously that's not all languages follow that pattern, and we have, in fact, I would say most languages don't follow that pattern. But if I came up to you and I say, you know, bookstoreese, you understand that I'm talking about a language that you speak in a bookstore. And so the point there is just that you can have these patterns for deriving related words from existing words. And for conlanging, that is a really powerful tool because coming up with words is actually kind of terrible. Like these words, you know, I came up with just by stringing things together by hand. There's also the gen tool that I showed you, right, that will generate words for you. So you can make words, but like if you have to come up with a separate word for every single thing, you will quickly find yourself having lots of words that are very similar, or lots of words that you know, should be related, like they're about similar things, but they don't sound at all alike. And that just, it's not how real languages work, and it's a lot of effort to do. So maybe don't do that. Maybe use derivational morphology instead. So that way you can come up with a root word. Like maybe let's say that koref means rock. Oh, and speaking of, I'm also going to start, in addition to these notes, I'm going to start a dictionary for us. because that's the other thing, as you come up with words and derive new words from them and so on, if you don't write them down, you're going to forget them and they're going to become inconsistent when you try to rederive them. So I strongly recommend keeping a dictionary, and whether that is, I don't have my physical notebook next to me, whether that's like just a physical notebook full of words or whether you have a special file for it or a section in your existing notes or whatever, it doesn't really matter how you record it, as long as you get in the habit of when you make a word, write it down. So, okay, so let's say that we've got a word like kolev, right? And we'll say that that means rock. So, okay, what sort of words could we make from that? Well, there's adjectives like rocky, but we could even go further and do things like maybe a pebble is just a small rock. And so we could grab, a suffix like Spanish has, like cito, right? Like, oh, osito, little bear. And we could tack that onto the end of kolev to make a pebble. Or maybe we could do the opposite. We could have a word for the really big version of something, and that would mean boulder or even mountain, right? But we can use emotional metaphors. We could say, when we say someone's having a rocky patch in their relationship, that doesn't really have anything to do with actual rocks. It's a cultural metaphor. And if you come up with metaphors like that, you can even extend words for like concrete nouns into words for abstract nouns that are metaphorically related. So we could do any of that. For our purposes, though, I find it's usually a good idea to start with the diminutive and the augmentive, that is the little version of something and the big version of something, because they're useful all over the place, right? Like a child could be a little adult or a little person, or maybe a child is a big baby, or maybe a river is a big stream, or an ocean is a big lake, or a puddle is a small lake or a small pond, right? It helps you to have lots of related words. So, okay, so let's pick. Obviously, we can come up with many different ways to derive things, right? I've been talking here about putting suffixes on things. That's not the only way to derive related words. And this is going to be a recurring theme. Languages, basically all the different ways that you can change a word, different languages will use those changes for different things. So, for example, in the first episode, we talked about how we were going to use these patterns of vowels, where like you've got I, o, right, to do word changes, like from seeking to seeking. Sparrow says, writer's note, if you simply create words relevant to geography in your created world, boom, it sounds like there was a different language-speaking people here in the long ago. Yes, that is an excellent point. If you are just making a language not to like make any poetry in or make old texts in or whatever, if you just need a language to like name landmarks and like maybe be surnames of characters, the things that you're going to want to focus on are phonology, so it sounds right, and derivational morphology, so that you get words that are related to each other in an interesting way. So back in the first episode, we were talking about these different vowels, and we were saying, okay, some change, we were looking forward to the future, some change at some point in the language is going to make use of these corresponding pairs of vowels. And so that's good. And so we could use that as part of our derivational morphology, right? Like we could decide that maybe if kolev is rock, then maybe like kulev is big rock. And our mountain, Ben says, and our mountain people are probably very familiar with rocks. Yes, exactly. I tend to use rock as my first example because once you have rock and like a few verbs, you can make a lot of example sentences to try out your grammar and make sure everything makes sense. Like, I throw the rock, I sit on the rock, I ate the rock. Yeah. Anyway, so we could, for this derivational morphology of like bigging and smalling things, we could use vowel changes. I'm not going to, because I think that would be a waste, because the way that we set up the vowels, there's only two sets of vowels. Grace says, I play the rock as distinct from I play the jazz. Yes, that's an example of using a metaphor to turn a concrete noun into an abstract noun. So, right, so we could use vowels. I don't want to use vowels here, the vowel changes here, because we've only got 2 sets of vowels, and there are a bunch of different derivational morphologies that I want to use. Okay, so if we're not going to do vowel change, what are the alternatives? Well, most languages that have some kind of derivational morphology like this, they'll use affixes. That means prefixes or suffixes. So, for example, maybe I put C on words. So, like maybe Sykolov is a big rock, or maybe Kolovsi is a big rock. But that's not the only way that you can modify things. So, for example, Arabic and other related languages, they actually will shuffle the consonants in a word, which is, the word for that is on the tip of my tongue. I'll come back to it in a moment. I'll randomly, in the middle of the next discussion, I'll remember the word and I'll shout it at you. But like if we wanted to shuffle the consonants, maybe you go from Kolov to Lovko, or even to like Folok, which sounds weird, but I mean, it works for Arabic. And usually languages that do that will have what's called a triconsonantal root system, which means that for all of your root words, you'll pick 3 vowels, and then the order of the vowels tells you how the derived word is related to the base word. Now, I think systems like that are pretty damn neat, but it's also slightly less common cross-linguistically. So unless people feel very strongly that they want to play with triconsonantal root systems, I'm probably going to go for some form of affix. But of course, I talked about prefixes and suffixes. There's also a third, less common kind of affix called an infix, which is where you stick a new word in the middle of a word, or stick a new syllable in the middle of a word. So, like, we might go from Kolov to Kosilov, right? Which is still clearly related, but we just dropped an extra syllable in the middle. What else? There's other changes that you can do, like reduplication, which is where you just say a word twice. Sparrow says, unbefrickin-leavable. Yes, that's an example of infixation in English. But there's also reduplication, which is where you say a word twice. So like maybe Kolov is rock and Kolov is many rocks, or small rocks, or you know, proud rocks, or whatever. So those are a bunch of ways that words can change, and we'll be coming back to those when we talk about grammatical morphology. But for the derivational morphology, unless people really want to explore one of those systems, I think that I'm probably just going to go with suffixes, because that is the most common thing. It's really easy to do. You just pick some suffixes, and then that's it, right? So maybe we want to go with something like fi or fisi. Fisi, that sounds kind of small, right? Fisi. Let's make that a new suffix. Diminutive. And actually, I'm going to turn off spell checking, because otherwise it will underline all of the words in her new language, and that's not helpful. And then that would mean that a word like but remember, we had vowel harmony, and I'll talk about that again in a moment. A word like kolofisi might mean little rock, but we also talked about how we weren't going to have like consonants up against each other, so maybe that just becomes kolofisi. So maybe we go with something like that. The other thing, when you're coming up with words for your languages, for like very basic words that everyone has, like rock, this is not so important. But when you're coming up with words, it's usually a good idea not to give them a one-to-one correspondence with English words. Like, for example, Spanish has separate words for to be, like, permanently and to be temporarily, although that's not quite a perfect description. Or, you know, Hawaiian has different words for to go up and to go down. And so seeing that your language like makes the separation between concepts in a different place than other languages, that can be a great way to make your language a little more alien and more rich without making it overwhelmingly different. And so, like, if I, instead of coming up with basic words like rock, if we were coming up with words for things like mountain, then I might say, oh, well, maybe they distinguish between like sharp mountains and rounded mountains. Or maybe they don't distinguish between mountains and hills, right? Maybe those both are the same word. So when you're defining words, always look to see, can you make a word that has a slightly different concept to it than just the English word? Because that'll make your language richer. So, okay. So, fisi, that's our diminutive. What do we want to do for the augmentive, the big form of things? I don't know, what sounds big? How do we feel about kech? Phobo. Sparrow says phobo. I like it. Now, if you remember from the intro, what we didn't do is we didn't distinguish any voiced sounds from any unvoiced sounds. So like we didn't distinguish p from ba. So I'm going to write that in my notes as phopo, but you can say it phobo because we're not distinguishing voicing, so they're the same thing. So let me put that in the dictionary before we lose it. Actually, and I realize now this isn't sorted. I'll come back and I'll sort the dictionary later so that we don't lose things. Grace says, in Gaelic, gorm carries a connotation of life and brightness, but formally means blue. But you can apply it to things which an English speaker could call green. Green sea foam, or dull green, on the other hand, is uanya. So that's an example of a language drawing the boundaries between things in different places. I think that Japanese might do a similar thing, where they distinguish differently between Midori and Ao than we do. But don't quote me on that. I'm only learning the very basics of Japanese right now. So that's a great example. Colors are also really interesting, and I'm actually going to talk about colors in like their whole own segment, because there's a specific order in which languages pick up color words, which is actually pretty consistent cross-culturally. And so I want to actually dedicate some time to talking about that, because it's in most places in language there are only very weak tendencies. There are very few hard and fast rules, because you can usually find one or two languages that do it the other way, right? So like a great example of that is let me see if I can find, the boba kiki effect. There was a study that had people look at these two pictures, and they asked people which one of these is boba and which one is kiki. And before I spoil it, or actually, I suppose is it been spoiled already? Yeah, okay, it's already been spoiled by the text, so that's unfortunate. I was gonna ask you all in the chat, but right. In some contexts, people will, even though they're nonsense words, they'll say that this one is boba and this one is kiki. And the researchers used that to posit that maybe there was this built-in thing where we interpret like high sounds as being sharper. But there are languages and there are pairs of words that don't do that. Like most notably in English, big and small, right? So you can sometimes get effects like that where sounds can have inherent meaning, but it's not like a hard and fast rule and that applies to most of language. Most stuff that I'm describing here is just like how most languages do it. You will always find languages that do things a little weirdly. But there is that one thing, that order in which color sounds appear, which is for whatever reason way more consistent. And so I want to do a whole separate section on color words. Adrian says, I was going to say an O or U sound. Yeah, and I feel like that's in fopo. So if we apply that to rock, then we get something like... we would get kolofopo, but we're going to do that thing again of combining the sounds and just make it kolofopo. And so maybe that's something like boulder, but maybe they also use that as the word for, like, you know, a cliff face. Right, some big thing that you can see as a rock. And maybe we'll come back and revise that, but okay. That thing I just did of applying a suffix and then rewriting the word to make it consistent, that is something that can help both kind of disguise where your suffixes come from sometimes, but also make your words sound nicer and, pardon me, more natural. So that's also something to think about. The reason that I keep asking you to point out words that you don't like is that once you do that, we won't just like ban that specific word. What we'll do is we'll look, okay, why is that word not nice? Can we make that into a general rule about how this language is pronounced? And then can we apply that to all of our existing rules to make something that's more cohesive? So yeah, okay. Okay, so that's diminutive and augmentive. What else can we do as derivational morphology? Well, there's a bunch of stuff that we could do, right? That's the wrong document. This is the right document. Right, so there's things that we could do, right? We could do words for people who come from a place, right? Or for an adjective form of things, or for, like, maybe the tool you use to do an activity, or for, like, a collection of things, like how we go from, not just a plural, like book and books, but like how we go from book to library. In English, there's not really a consistent way to do that, but we could have a consistent way to do that, right? Like, so maybe there's the same thing that relates book to library relates tree to forest. What else can you do with derivational morphology? Well, obviously you can have like specific classes of thing that are related to things. So the most obvious that is like the language that is spoken in a place or that is spoken by a people. But you could even do something like the verb that you most commonly do with a thing, right? Like, and I'm sure I've misspelled characteristic and that people will let me know. But, so that might mean, like, if I have a ball, well, maybe we form the verb for throw from the word for ball. Sparrow says, like penning or knifing? Yes, exactly like penning or knifing. It's so, right, and that's kind of the opposite of this tool, right, where if the word knifing came first and then you turned it into knife, that would be a tool use. But since the word knife came first and we turned it into knifing, that's like a characteristic verb. So there's a whole bunch of these, right? And if you're struggling to come up with words for something, you might come up with new ways to derive those words from the other things. Oh, the other big category of the way you can do derivational morphology, I talked before a little bit about metaphors, but you can have overriding linguistic metaphors. Like, we often describe up as being like good and bright and like positive, and down as being dark and negative, and like positive and negative things kind of group. You could have a derivation based on that, right? Like, if you have a word for like tall thing, you can have a word for short thing. But if you had some other cross-linguistic metaphor like that, like maybe you call good things sharp and bad things round, right? Then you could also base a derivation on that. Grace says, in English, balling is considered a dirty example of this, but a baller is someone who's good at a game. Yeah, I mean, I think baller gets used in a few different contexts, but I mean, earlier when Sparrow said unbe-frickin' leavable, that was obviously alluding to a vulgarism, and we can talk later a bit about the specific effect that swear words have on the development of a language, because swear words are interesting. They're kind of their whole own subject, and I'm also not sure how I'm going to talk about them on a stream that I know some young people are watching, but I'll figure it out. I can use linguistic terms. But the point is, I want to talk specifically about swear words later because they're actually really interesting grammatically. Bill says, or like the rocky patch of a relationship you mentioned before. Yes, exactly, right? That's again using a metaphor. So you can come up with metaphors like that and use them to extend classes of words, and that's all great. So let's think about this. Like let's figure out some of these other ones and see what we want. How we want to indicate them. Let's look at collective, because I think collective is really interesting, right? It's how you would turn, like, rocks into a field of rocks, or books into a library, or trees into a forest. I feel like that's a very powerful one. So let's go with collective next. Collective is one place where more languages will use some form of reduplication. So yeah, let's actually do a chain of derivations. So, I don't know. I don't really like the word chmas negek for something simple, right? But maybe we want to use the word chmas for something simple, because that's a nice word that we can then extend. So let's try putting down... oh, that's the wrong document again. Let's try putting down chmas as... I don't know. Let's go for tongue. Chmas, tongue. Oh, Sparrow says lake, water. Okay, let's go for lake instead. That radically derails my plans. I love it. So we have a lake. So what can we derive from a lake? Well, obviously we already know big lake and small lake, right? But if we want to talk about that thing that a lake is made of, maybe we want to have no, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry at all. That's why I'm doing this interactively. If we want to have a word for, like, what a lake is made of, maybe that's a derivation we want to do. So like, and that's something we could apply to other words too. Like maybe we have different words for rock the object and rock the material, right? So let's throw in, someone can go ahead and pick something, but since I'm acting at that delay, I'm gonna go with PEM maybe for the material that something is made of, right? Because then we could go with chmaspem for water. But water is so common, right, that like we probably don't just want to stick a suffix on it and call it done. Maybe that word will get simpler over time. Like if we say chmaspem, 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 over time, maybe that boils down to masem, right? So that's clearly still related, right? And still got the mas in it even, right? But now we've got chmas, lake, masem, water, clearly related, but we've made things different, slightly different. And that's something you'll see really commonly used words. I strongly encourage you to just chant them. It will make you look silly. A lot of linguistics will make you look silly. But if you have a complicated word like, anti-disestablishmentarianism, the reason that word is still so complex is because it's describing a very specific thing that is not used very often. But if we, for whatever reason, started needing to talk about anti-disestablishmentarianism every day in our everyday lives, it would get shortened, probably to, like, anti-dis, I guess. How it would be shortened depends on the language and depends on how it's being shortened. But the point is, words that we use more commonly are simpler. They're shorter. They use more smooth phonemes because they get said more, and so people say them more smoothly. Sparrow of Doom says, chmasfisi for pond. Yes, exactly, chmasfisi. And as I said, this dictionary is not in order. I will alphabetize it later. Boom, chmasfisi. Okay. Okay, so we've got lake, we've got pond, we've got water. What else can we do that are water words? Well, maybe we want to derive the word for swim from the word for water, like, or maybe the word for drink. Yeah, let's go with drink, because like we talked before about having a character, like a tool derivation, like how you would go from knifing to knife. Hold on, there we go. And I mean, it's not that you drink using water as a tool. Sparrow suggests river. Yes. Yeah, I like river too. Maybe we want to talk about having like an active versus static distinction. Um, so, and Bill says, or rain. Yes, I like that too. Okay. Let me just put down some ideas. We want to do river, and we want to do rain, and we want to do drink. Sparrow says rain, mix water and sky. Sure. Or maybe we have a specific derivation for like lots of little pieces of something. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but maybe we want to call rain lots of little pieces of water. Ice. Bill says ice. Ice could be rock water. Sure. Okay. Ice. Okay. So I like the idea of the rock water because that's easy. Let's turn kolof into a suffix to use for things. So maybe we want to say that lof is actually like the material rock. And then maybe we say something like Masemlov is, Masemlev is like ice. But if we look at this, well then, instead of defining the words like this, where we made lof out of kolof, I'm sorry, I'm still saying that wrong, where we made löf out of kolef, oh my goodness, Sparrow says, oh my goodness, Masemlofopo is a glacier. Yes, exactly. That's how these derivations build on each other, right? And they can make much more complicated like structures of words. So, okay, but what was I thinking? Oh, I was thinking, we did kolef is rock, where we said lif is like rock, the material. Well, maybe the prefix ko really means, maybe we turn this not into a suffix. Maybe we make ko into a prefix, meaning like the thing that is made of a material. Bill says, and backstory-wise, mountain people would see ice and snow more than coastal peoples. Yes, exactly. And so it would make sense that they would have a lot of finely graded related words for these things, whereas maybe they would just have like one word for big body of water, and they would not distinguish like seas and oceans and bays and inlets because they don't have any of those, right? So, okay. So let me get down the Masemlefopo. Okay, so that's ice. Let's do river. So how do we connect the concepts of river and water? Well, I mean, there's a going there, right? Like the difference between a lake and a river is really that one of them is holding still. Maybe we have a word, a suffix for moving things, and yeah, implying movement. Like, let me think, is that something we could generalize to other examples? Like maybe we could have, maybe we would go for like from rock to rock slide, or from, even building to wheel, or like building to cart, or maybe something like tree to tree fall, or lava, or zombies. Yes, exactly, right? So, okay, I think that having a suffix for movement could totally work. Okay, so let's pick one of these. Or we could pick a new one. How do we feel about... Oh, none of these are jumping out at me. Bill says, I see how the backstory dictates what words are used by the people, and it's fun to think about. Yes, exactly. That's one of the things I love about conlanging, is that it's more so than other, like other art forms, you have to have a lot of skill, like, you know, to do art or music, or even to some extent writing. One of the things I love about conlanging is that the things that make it fun and beautiful are about this kind of multiplicative effect where, you know, this influences that, right? So like every part of the work comes together and meshes together. And I just find that really fun. So yeah, absolutely. And if you're a fantasy writer writing for a specific place, you know, you have a huge leg up in conlanging because you already know the background story that you need in order to make these decisions. So, okay, so what were we doing? Oh, we were getting a suffix for movement. Feel free to yell out suffix ideas in the chat, but let me look at these sounds that we've got access to. What feels like movement right now? Maybe we want like song. Song. That sounds like movement, right? Like song. Let's try that. And if someone else throws an idea in the chat, then I'll use that instead. But if we go for Smachsang, and then we do the reduction of double letters, Khmasang, we can call that a river. And then obviously we can apply the diminutive to that, and we could get like Khmasang, nope, that's the wrong character. Khmasang Yisi could be like a rivulet, like a little river. But Khmasang Yisi, that doesn't sound quite right. I feel like these sounds are going to influence each other somehow, because if I say Khmasang Fisi, maybe that turns into Khmasafisi. I don't know. I like Khmasafisi a little bit better, but I'm not sure I have enough of an idea in my mind to make that into a general rule yet. So okay. Boom. So we've got a bunch of water and river things. Let's talk about verbs next, right? Because these are all great nouns, and so all of our example sentences are going to be about rocks and about lakes, because that's the words we've got things for right now. But let's come up with some basic verbs so that way next time when I want to talk about grammar, we can actually make sentences that have verbs in them. Sparrow says, this is just delightful. I'm so glad. Yes, we could throw rocks into the lake. Exactly. You see where I'm going with this. Okay. So let's go verbs. So here's actually, before we do verbs, this is a great moment to talk about irregular verbs. Because the same way that words that get used more often tend to be simpler and shorter, verbs that get used really commonly, like, you know, to be or to go, those tend to be more irregular than, you know, verbs like dematerialize, right? Like dematerialize isn't irregular because we don't use it often enough for everyone to learn special rules about it. But something like to be, I am, you are, he is, we are, they are. Okay, in English that's not super weird. But then if you look at the past tense, it's like I was, you were, was, were, right? And so there's more change there than there normally is. Sparrow says, is, am, are, was, were, be, been. Yes, exactly. The point is that those are all the same verb, but they don't sound super connected, and that's really common in the most basic verbs in a language. So because of that, I usually don't like to start with to be and to go as verbs, because if I try to pin those down too early, they won't be sufficiently irregular and I won't be able to make them really match the rest of the grammar as well. So let's go with not the most basic, but like still fairly basic words like throw and drink and sit on, right? So okay, so let's do throw first. So what do we want to do for throwing? Throw. Grace says, I have read that there's only one language in the world with completely regular verbs, including the copula. Great. Do you know which language it is? Because I haven't heard that, but it wouldn't surprise me because, as I said, languages have all of these things that I'm talking about. They're trends. They're not hard and fast rules. And I mean, I know that Scottish Gaelic, Grace says that she thinks that it's Quechua that does that. I'm not sure about that. Quechua, I thought, had irregularities, but what do I know? Quechua is a really cool language. It was the native language spoken in South America through a bunch of the Andes. It's actually a related family of languages, and you'll often see linguists talking about it because it is different from all of the other languages, but it's still fairly well studied and still has a large native speaker population. So Quechua is a cool language. I don't know off the top of my head if it's perfectly regular. I don't even know if Wikipedia would know, but okay, I suppose it's not really important. Yeah, and you'll have languages that have greater and lesser degrees of irregular verbs, right? Like I know that Scottish Gaelic has irregular verbs, but like I think it's only 10 of them. Whereas if you look at, something like Spanish, there are a lot more irregular verbs, even though there's some patterns to the irregularities. Or same thing with English. There's some irregular verbs, more than 10, I think, but there's also some pattern to the way that they are irregular. So anyway, let's talk about like a normal throwing verb. So what feels like throw right now? And this is why before the broadcast, I went and that's the wrong document again. This will be a theme. I went and I put together some words so that we could pick from them. Like we already used kolef, which is the one I really liked most. But what if we go for like kasipia? Like that kasipia. That could be a throwing word, I feel like. So let's put that down. That's fine. And by the way, if you're wondering how I'm typing these special characters, I touched on that a little bit last episode. I'm using a system called the Compose key for Linux. There are things like that for Windows and Mac. If you're interested in keeping your notes in special characters instead of just coming up with some kind of romanization, there are ways to type these, and you should look it up for your operating system. But okay, let's make this to throw. Kasipia. I like that, kasipia. So what else can we derive from to throw? Well, we talked earlier about there being words for like the tool for something. So, the mountain people that I'm thinking about, they're not super advanced in terms of mechanics. And they also, because they're in the mountains, they don't have like huge herds of animals. So they make things with animal skins, but like they don't do as much hunting as some cultures do. So maybe instead of using bows where you need like guts properly to make them, maybe they use atlatls. And so maybe we have a throwing tool mean atlatl. Sparrow says they sure can throw rocks. Yes, exactly. You're picking up what I'm putting down. No, like because they're built into mountainsides, there's a lot of, like, when you want to go assault someone else's village, there's a lot of pushing boulders down on people and having the high ground and sneaking around to the high ground and so on. So yeah, okay, throwing rocks. So what do we want to use for the characteristic tool for something? Well, I don't know. Let's look more at these syllables. How do we feel about yech? Is that too close to anything? I don't think it is too close to anything we've done so far. So maybe we could make like kasipia yech. Sparrow says, say again. Say what again? I can say again. Kasipia yech. Excuse me. Hold on. I'll wait for you to say what you want me to say again. Oh, the suffix for tool? Yech. We don't have to, it doesn't have to be yech, right? If you don't like yech, then let me know. But I was looking for suffixes that I don't think we've already incorporated into our existing words in any way. Not that there's not going to be some reuse between suffixes and words, and there's also, for grammatical morphology, it matters if you have overlaps, but for derivational morphology, it's actually okay if you get like collisions where you have similar words that end up being different because they use different rules, or if you've got words that sound similar but that actually come from different roots. That's totally okay in derivational morphology, because we're making up all of these words anyway, and real languages do that too, so it's fine. Sparrow says it's kind of cute. Okay, so let's stay with yech for the moment now. So we've got kasipia yech for atlatl. I'm not sure how I feel about it. Well, we might want to come back to this. Maybe the word would get worn down over time, and it would become something like kasipayech or kasipyayech. Kasipyech. Kasipyech isn't actually kasipyech. I like that better. Kasipyech. Okay. So we've got kasipyech to throw and kasipyech, the thing that you throw with. Cool. Well, that is, at a very basic level, what I wanted to get done today, because now we have some basic nouns like rocks and lakes, and we have a basic verb, throw, and so next time when I want to talk about the very beginnings of grammar, that's all we need to put together example sentences. But they'll be pretty dull if this is all of the words that we have to work with. So I'm going to offer a choice, and let me know in the chat what you want to do. We can either move on to talking about very basic grammar right now, which will easily eat up the next 40 minutes. And then in between sessions, I'll come up with more words using this derivation process that I've shown you in order to have more words to talk about next time. Or we just spend the next 40 minutes making up words, and we say a bunch of fun words, we make way more, and then next time when we're doing grammatical examples, we'll have more words to pick from. Let me know which one you want to do in the chat. Sparrow says, and kusipyech could mean a different specific object to different groups of people. Yeah, it absolutely could, right? If it's a generic throwing tool, then maybe it means atlatl in one place and bow in another, and that could be like a regional difference. Sparrow votes for let's make words. Okay, excellent. I want to see if anyone else votes, but we can just keep going making words. I'm excited to make words. Bill says words. Cool, then we're doing words. Sorry, correction. I am drinking water for a moment, and then we're doing words. It's still really hot, but that's okay. Adrian also votes words. Excellent. I feel like that's a consensus. Okay, what else do we want to do? Well, let's pick out some other basic verbs. Like what are some not verbs that we wouldn't want to be irregular that we'll come back to later, but like simple things like, I don't know, run. Like or maybe not run, maybe that's related to go. Maybe we do something like eat, right? Eat could be a verb. Oh gosh. Eat could be a word. Sparrow, if we have catch, then we can make a dialogue. Ooh, I like how you think. Yeah, let's do catch. Okay, so let's pop back to looking at phonemes, and let's pick out phonemes that we like for catch. What do we feel like is a catching sound today? We haven't really used R or L too much. Maybe we want to go for like res or rem, nyem, nyekem. How do we feel about nyekem? Kind of a suction noise. So this is another thing that I didn't talk about during the phonology section. All of the phonemes that I talked to you about are called, actually, what is the word for the, it's on the tip of my tongue, pulmonic. They're called pulmonic consonants because they're made with breath from the lungs, pulmonary breath. There are also consonants that work the other way, consonants that you make by sucking in air, like which is fun. But so we don't have any literal sucking sounds in our language, but we can still go with something like that. Like maybe so like a foy, foisen. Bill says, or how whatever we throw hits the target, or the rock that we throw, rather. Yeah. Adrian says, no. What have I done wrong? No slurping. No slurping. I'm sorry. Okay. But how do we feel about fosson for catch? And we can come back to hits and target, because I think those are also important words. Fosson? Okay. Let's go with fosson. Oh, we're using a lot of O's. Maybe we want to get other sound. Well, no, it's fine for now. Do we have a sound that is made by peeling the tongue off the palate? Sparrow asks. Yes, we have an entire round of palatal consonants, right? These are the ones that I've written with a J after, like pia and mia. If you say that, the y sound is coming from your tongue, dropping from the roof of your mouth down after you say the sound. So, okay, so maybe we want to throw those into catch instead. Maybe we want to do fiosion. 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 Sparrow has suggested a word. So she has suggested phonios. Phonios. Yes, fiosion. Okay, we clearly crossed each other's streams, but I like fionios. It sounds better. Phonios. Phonios. Fionios. Yeah, fionios. Okay, so that's a catch. Obviously, we could use the same throwing the tool suffix on it for a catching tool. I mean, they don't play baseball. I'm not sure what a catching tool would look like yet, so I'm not sure if that makes sense. But maybe we can come back to it. And we're going to have other ways to derive words from verbs later. Oh, that's my mouse. I have dropped my mouse on the floor, helpfully. So maybe we'll maybe come back to that. What other words did Bill suggest? Bill suggested hits and target. Okay, so let's talk about hitting. What sounds like a hitting? And that's something I think that we can come up with several different words based on, right? Because we could talk about, a hitting tool like maybe a mace or a sword, or we could use the metaphor that we haven't really talked about, and we could use, maybe we want to metaphorically talk about like hitting material for tough or something like that. So hitting, what are we going to do for hitting? Maybe some more of a rough sound. Maybe we want like a kitek. How do we feel about kitet? Hitting definitely sounds plosive. Yes, that is exactly what I was thinking. Let's go with kitet, because that's all plosives. And if we do that, maybe also want to maybe we want to extend Fionos to not just mean like physically catching, but also like metaphorically catching, like receive. That might turn out to be useful later. But okay, so we've got kitet for hit. What can we do with kitet? Well, so we talked about maybe a kitet tool. So what would that be like? That would be like a oh, did I put down yek? I didn't put down the yek suffix. Oops. So hold on, let me just throw in. This is what I meant by always write things down or you'll forget them. Kitet yek. Hitting tool. What hitting tool would they be most familiar with? Maybe this is like a stave, right? Or like a mace, a blunt hitting things with, or maybe it's a hammer, right? Maybe I'm not sure. We might have to come back to this and clear up some of these words. But okay, but what else can we do? Because like we don't just have this tools. Maybe we want to do that thing I mentioned with using the ko prefix to make the material of something, right? Or a hammer. Bill says, or a hammer. Yes, exactly, hammer. Yeah, let's make it mean mace or hammer, right? not stave. We can make stave out of the word for stick or something. But okay, so if we have, maybe we want kokitet. Kokitet, well, that would mean, literally, it would mean like hit material, which doesn't make too much sense. But if we think about that metaphorically, like hit material, maybe that's a strike, like you strike with the tool. Right? So you strike a blow with the hammer, right? And so those could be related. What else could we do here? Well, we have, we can still use the diminutive and the augmentive, right? So maybe we want something like kititet fisi. That's like a little hit, right? Maybe that means, you know, a shove or a tap, right? I like tap, like a tap, a nudge. Kititet fisi. Kititet fisi. Is that also a word that we want to wear down? Would it sound better if it was just kitet fisi? Kitet fisi. Yeah, I think it would. So I'm gonna pull the second T out of there to make it sound a bit better. Yeah, Bill says a tap. We are definitely on the same wavelength here. We could use like the augmentive form, the big form, right? That would be like a kitet football. And that could be like, that's a big hit. That's an impact. Bill says, ha, I keep hitting enter. Is yes. Yep. So A, now you know exactly how long the delay is. And B, clearly we're thinking in the same way, and that's great. So okay, so a big hit, that's like an impact, or like something that you would write in a comic book as thud, right? Like a big solid hit. So like maybe a rock falling down a mountain goes thud. Bill says, don't mean to be redundant. No, don't worry about it. I'm so glad. I'm having fun. And I hope you are too. So, okay. So that's a bunch of hitting related words. What else do we want to do? Well, we thought about target. Well, okay. Well, what could we do for target? Because we could just come up with a word for it, but maybe we want to derive it from something else. Like in English, we talk about like bullseyes on things because we paint them on targets. Maybe we want to derive it from eye. Maybe we want like eye and target to be the same word, but that seems a little unnecessarily harsh. Maybe we do target from the word for valley, because like streams flow down into valleys, everything falls down into valleys. Clearly valleys are the target. I like that idea. Or maybe we go the other way and we derive valley from target. I don't know. I feel like valley is maybe, or one's prey. Oh, that's an excellent example. Yeah, because right, that would be the first thing. So okay, let's start with valley, I think, and then use that to derive like prey and target. Oh, and objective and goal. Yes, exactly. Okay. So what are we feeling like are sounds for a valley right now? I don't know. What are valley sounds? Lamb, lan, lassang, lassak. How do we, anyone throw suggestions for sounds? Sparrow suggests floosh. I like how you think. We could do floos. Yeah, floos. That fits our rules, right? Floos. Yes, excellent. Floos. That's kind of a round, yeah, so that's the right O. When making these, I forgot about the vowel harmony. This should be right instead of an O. Because when we were talking about phonology, remember I was talking about how if we use vowel harmony so that all the vowels in a word are from the same class, that will make using the class for grammatical distinctions easier later. So let me just fix that. But okay, flos, valley. Well, and obviously that means that we can have a little valley, right? Like a flosfiesi, which maybe just becomes a floffiesi for a pit, right? Right, or a hole. But maybe we can also, so we talked earlier about having like the difference between a river and a pond, or did we? Sparrow says water valley. Yes, that is exactly where I was going, as I was thinking, do we want to have a special word for a pond in a valley, or do we want to use the same thing that we did to change the water words here on valley? So Sparrow says masemflos. Yeah, water valley, masemflos. That would certainly work. But I was thinking specifically about, right, we did river, we did lake as chmas, and we did river as chmasang. So I think that that's song, which is another thing I forgot to write down. I think that we were using song as like the dynamic moving form of a thing. So, you know, maybe it doesn't make sense to say that a valley is literally moving, but if we do flosang, that's like, if you think of movement to a valley, maybe that's like falling down, falling towards. Maybe that's our word for target. And this is all wishy-washy. And let me, while we're here, I'll put down masemflos. Okay, so maybe that gives us our word for target. So what do we want to do for like prey? Well, we could come up with a different word for prey and then like mash them together, or a different word for animal and then mash them together. Maybe we want to create a whole derivation based around animals. Like maybe we call a turtle like a rock animal. We call a fish a water animal. Bill says, from a distance, the trees swaying, etc., can make a valley look like it's moving for sure. That's a really good point. Yeah, maybe this doesn't mean target. Maybe we want it to mean moving valley, or like a living valley. That could be interesting. Well, let me think about it. I might come back to the concept of a living valley in a moment. But like, if we come up with a derivation for animal, then I feel like that really pays us dividends, right? Because we can come up with all different kinds of animals and describe them using poetic metaphors. So let's think what sounds here. Since we're not using it, I'm just gonna hide the web browser and put our sounds right beside our dictionary, so that we can look at them both at the same time. Connecting life to valley, I like a lot. Yes, right. Okay. Good. So. Well, if we connect life to valley, well, what do we want to do for animal? Because that's where I feel like going next. Maybe we want to do something like lomet, lomes. How do we feel about lomes for animal? I like that sound. If we throw in lomes, animal, which you can see I kind of made it sound, it used some of the same consonants as valley so that they'll sound related, even though I didn't have a formal derivation process there. And maybe then we'll use like mes as, yeah, lomes. Maybe then we can use like lumes as like another derivation for like the related animal thing, and that could give us words like, you know, kolofmes, kololmes, it could be like a turtle, right? I was talking about turtles. But this also means that we can have, if we throw in target, right? If we did something like flosangmes, well, that's a target animal. That's a prey animal, right? Prey animal. Okay, cool. Okay, so we've got words that relate to target and valley and throw and catch. What else do we want to throw in here? Is there anything else that we want to derive or that we're going to use for our examples? Oh, right, we were talking about living valleys. So what do we want to do for living valleys? Well, if instead of doing flosangmes, if we did like flossless, maybe. Well, that would be a valley animal, but maybe we use that to refer to like the whole spirit of the valley entire, right? Like the valley considered as an animal. Maybe we use that as like a equivalent of ecosystem, right? Like the concept of a bunch of living things that are all part of one living thing. Sparrow says, we also need I see prey animal, I hunt prey animal, I throw rock at prey animal, I hit prey animal, I eat prey animal. Bill says, life, home, and family might connect with valley. Ooh, interesting. So I'd pictured the mountain people as being like their houses built back into the rocks to like conserve space, but you're right. Like the valley is where they're going to do the majority of their like animal husbandry and what's the word? Farming. So like maybe we want to connect home to be like where you go after the valley, or like from the valley you go home. Sparrow says, got to be near the water. Yeah, that's another good point. Houses do have to be near the water, so they're not going to be like up on the mountain peaks unless there's a stream. So, I mean, yeah. Whew. Okay, so many ideas. This is excellent. Let me write down some of these ideas so that we don't lose them. But we wanted words for like eat, hunt, see. We already got throw and hit. I think we have hit. Yeah, we have hit. We want family, maybe connected to valley and water. Same thing with home. Bill says, or where they observe nature and animals in their homes too, in the valley. Yeah, yep. Sparrow says, and the people of the north side of the mountain share a watershed with the people from the south side of the next mountain, closer than the south side of our own mountain. Yes, I think that makes sense, because going over the mountains is harder than going through the valley. So valleys are like the natural unit of community and not mountains, which is clearly something to think about. Okay. Let's pick up the next one. I'm not sure. I want to think a little bit about how I want family and valley and so on to be connected. Let's talk about eat, maybe, right? Because then we can talk about eating animals and eating rocks, and we can derive the words for foodstuffs and so on. So, Sparrow says, this is so much fun. I'm glad that you're having fun. That was the point. Yes. So, okay, so what do we feel like is eating? Maybe like, Nosh. Bill says, I imagine the valley is directly below these people so that they are in or out of the valley daily. It is a source for them. Yes, exactly. The valley is definitely going to be like more of a common area and a place where they end up being than the mountaintop is, right? Like maybe the mountaintop becomes kind of more of a, I don't want to necessarily say place of reverence, but like a faraway place. Also, I feel like in shifting around, I've ended up not in the center of the camera. Let me check. No, I am in the center of the camera. Excellent. Okay. So what was I saying? Oh, I was trying to come up with something for eat, because I feel like that's the next basic thing that we can derive a bunch from. Sparrow says, I keep trying to scroll your screen. Yes, sorry. Maybe I should have done this in Google Docs so that everyone could look at it. But if you tell me what you want to see, I can scroll to it. Let's put down something like ngos. Ngos? I like the sound of that for eat, right? And we can derive a bunch of stuff from that, like maybe. Like Ngosyak could be teeth, right? And now we're starting to get body parts. Okay, so that's eat. Hunt and see. Let's maybe come back to those later. Let's think about home. So what's a word that like combines the words we've made for like valley and lake, for like but without being like the water valley. Like, so we've got floss is valley, we've got Nost, Chmas is lake. Bill says, I imagine a word for a child or offspring would be an important word for a people's. Yes, absolutely. And I mean, we can, that I talked earlier about, we could make the word for child from like the diminutive version of the word for person. But let me keep going with the home, lake, valley thought for a moment. Like, Chmas, floss, floss, flossma, flossma, floch. How do we feel about floch? Home also implies a hearth. Oh, so many connotations that we want to work in here, right? Like, I'm going to tentatively put down floch for home, right? Because it sounds kind of related to valley and kind of related to water. So let's go with that. But I'm going to put down that it's tentative because I'm not sure. We might want to combine it with words for like fire or hearth or family. But yeah, so speaking of the word for child, what about the word for a person? Person. Maybe, I don't know. I feel like that should also be, Ben says floch sounds cool. Sparrow says pim for person. I love it. Okay. Although it's very similar to PEM for material. Pim-pam, flash. I like it. Okay, pim. Where does that go? No, I'll sort the dictionary later. I'll just put it over here. Pim. So let's make that a person. What other senses we would want? Like, that's a person, like that's a thing that is animate. I'm not sure about that. But then we could... So it's a little pim, right? Like a little pim would be like a pimfisi. Pimfisi. And maybe by contrast, therefore, you make like a big person, like a pimfopo, an adult, right? Like a big person. And this is where I was talking about. Well, and obviously we can throw in like pim-pam for flesh because that's an easy derivation. But maybe we also want to throw in a word like a collection of people is a family or a group. Bill says, a person is similar to the person I am. Maybe reflection comes from person. Ooh, I like that. Oh, maybe your reflection is your water person. Sparrow says, prey, animal, pem is meat. Yes. So, okay. Hold on. First of all, let's throw in the prey animal. Flossangmespim, that sounds long, like maybe it would probably get worn down. Flossangespim, flossonges, meat. Yeah, because meat's a really common word. Okay, but jumping back to the water person. Okay, so we've got Pim is person. What was water? Water was like Masem. Okay, so maybe we throw in Pimasem. And maybe we can come up with like some cool background myths about like people getting pulled into the water by their pimasems, or like maybe they're like the equivalent of kelpies, or there's a whole reflected mountain people that live under the lake. I like that idea. We can go far with this. Bill says, cool, gosh darn, this is too much fun. Yes, it's amazing, and this is why I wanted to do a thing about conlanging. Sparrow says, Flossanyesim, Flossan, that's kind of like floch for home, right? Or where else is floss from? Floss was valley, wasn't it? Floss. Yeah, so Flossan Masim. Okay, I'm sorry, Sparrow. I've lost track of where you derived Flossanyasem from. but let me know, because I will put it together in a moment. Sparrow says, and your shadow is the memory of your pimisem. Yeah, I like that. And your pimisem could be your conscience. Ooh, pimisem is your conscience, or is your inner self. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but because like I like the idea of making it a thing that we can have myths about, and I'm not sure if that really fits consciousness. But, or twin siblings, so many ideas, right? Ooh, I like it being a colloquial word for your twin. That's interesting, right? So maybe we can come back to twin. But I like the word Flosanyisem. Where on earth is that derived from? Flos Valley. Nyesim. That sounds kind of similar to Masem for water. So Flosanysim. So yeah, that's like would be like the reflected valley in the water. Flos. Oh no, that's where it came from Target. Flosang Masem. Water target. So let's do Flosamasem. And let's Flosasem. Sparrow says, Flosanyisem was going for an alternate spelling of something. Oh, of meat. Yes, I put down meat. Flosanges is what I have down for meat. Oh, okay, what I have here is better. Thank goodness. Okay. So yes, this is exactly what I wanted, because now we have definitely enough words to do grammatical examples with, but also my plan for the rest of the Let's Make a Language series is whatever topic we're talking about that day, when we get done with the topic, I'm going to fill the rest of the time with making more words, because making words is both really fun and one of the more time-consuming parts of conlanging, because you need to think about a bunch of different things. So my intent was to do some of this between episodes if we needed to, but mostly to put this like as filler to fill up the space at the end of episodes. So before we do something for the last 10 minutes, though, I want to just check in and make sure that 2 hours is like a good amount of time. Like I picked 2 hours because Twitch encourages you to stream in at least 2-hour blocks, and I felt like it was probably about the amount of time that I could stay interesting talking about something. But if you want longer or shorter broadcasts, or anything else that you want to let me know about Let's Make a Language, even if you feel too shy to engage with the chat, go ahead and email me. My email is in the channel description, and I can't wait to hear from people. Sparrow says, it's slightly long for my brain, but 90 minutes plus work time is perfect. Bill says, perfect time for me. Good, excellent. So yeah. And Sparrow, that's exactly what I was thinking, is like the first chunk is whatever topic we're talking about, right? Like, so next time it'll be basic grammar, like tense, aspect, mood. And then the last time is making words. All right, excellent. So that went well. So we got 10 minutes left. We can do a few more words in that time. What else have we got that we wanted to come up with words for? Oh, okay. So did we put down something for home? We put down something. We have people. We have the concept of people now, right? With PEM. And we have, so maybe we want to do something like Pemflos, the people of the valley. Sparrow asks, is meat different from food? Ooh, good question. So obviously English has like a separate word for meat, right? But I don't know, because so obviously like if you remember from like middle school science, if you've got animals that are feeding on plants, like you've got about 1/10 less energy inherent in the animals. So like if the people were really pressed for like population space, they might do less hunting and more farming. But ultimately, I think it does make sense to distinguish it. Sparrow says, I think yes, since it's derived from throwing rocks at it. Yeah, right, exactly. And the difference between hunting and farming is also something that's like so common. I would be a little surprised if a language didn't distinguish them. Not to say that there isn't a language, because languages break all the rules, but I think I'm okay with them being separate words. So, okay, so we've got Pemflos, people of the valley, right? So what about your home? Well, I mean, people say home is where the heart is. Maybe we want to also derive home. Or did we already put home somewhere? Have I forgotten about that? We did. Floch, home. Okay, cool. Never mind. That's the other great thing about having a dictionary, is that after you've made a word, if you don't remember that you made it, you won't remember that it exists. So keeping a dictionary is definitely important. What else? So okay, do we want to relate C to Pimasem? Well, no, because Pimasem is derived from water and person. We probably let's make like vision and eye different things. If we come up with the word for eye, then we can make see like the characteristic verb that you do with it, or we could make eye the characteristic tool of seeing. Pimfloch is my housemates. Yes, Pimfloch would be your house people. And I've used an E when I should have used an I there. Yeah, okay. What was I saying? I do not remember what I was saying. I'm sure it'll come back to me. Oh, right. Like eye and vision, those could be related to each other. Let's throw in a slightly more complicated word for eye, because we've used a lot of short words. We don't want to use up all of them, right? So let's think eye could be like Niepa, Niepamfel. How do we feel about Niepamfel for I? I like that. And then, well, actually, no, that doesn't quite work, because we were talking about using yech for tool. So let's Niepamyech. And then we can make Niechpam to see, right? Like Sparrow says Pomfel. Oh, was that a suggestion for I? I hope so, because I feel like it should be derived from something from looking at it. Yeah, okay. So that gives us to see, to perceive. Okay, that's pretty good. And what else can we derive? Well, we could call something, what's something that's small and round? Because we could call it a little eye. Or maybe we could call, ooh, I like this. We could call the sky the big eye, right? A big eye. So that would be something like but that's a mouthful for something that should be pretty common. So let's see if we can wear that down to make it a more palatable. Oh, Bill says, or the sun. Yes, I like that idea better, because that's definitely a better fit for an eye. Okay, that's still a bit long for something so familiar as the sun. Sparrow says, the big eye, the sun can be the day's eye, and if there are moons and stars, the night's eyes and the god's eyes. Ooh, I like that. So I'm just gonna Nemyekfop. Okay, that's starting to be short enough that it could be the sun. So let's make that the word for sun for now, and then when we're deriving things, then we're deriving all the other like sky features like stars and moons. We can also get them from the eye. Maybe Yeah. Yeah, maybe we call the moon, oh gosh, what's the moon like? The moon, Sparrow says, kinda creepily big brother religion, but we can take care of that with a good cosmogony myth. Yes. Yeah, I mean, and the other thing about this is, right, I haven't really talked about when in time this language is, because I'm kind of leaving that deliberately vague. But there's no reason why you can't have a language that forms in one environment and then moves with a people to a new environment. So, like, if we have a language that gets formed in this condition in a valley, in an isolated community, and then, you know, for some reason there's a cataclysm and they need to flee over the mountains and they end up in a different place, they would keep all of the language, right? And that's another reason why looking at the history of languages can actually tell you a great deal about what happened to people that sometimes isn't even recorded in their actual history, although frequently it is. So even if we have some kind of creepily big brother eyes staring at you thoughts, those don't have to be there, right? They can be there for the formation of the words, and then we can forget about them in whatever modern times is for this setting. So, okay. It is not quite one. We've got like another 2 minutes, but I am starting to feel my voice go, so I think that I'm going to end it here. But this has been the second episode of Let's... Oh, that... Okay. Bill and Mod, I wasn't even thinking when Okay. So 2 things. A, you can see now that my camera is in fact a phone, and it just fell, but it is fine, and everything is fine, and I am fine, and I hope that you did not manage to see up my kilt when the phone fell. Right, okay. Calm down. Bill says, I wasn't even thinking when, I immediately jumped to an early civilization, but it doesn't need to be. Yeah, I don't know when this civilization is quite. I haven't really pinned it down. And as I said, languages change over time. There's no reason not to start with an earlier version of the language and then let it evolve over time to become like a more modern form. Yeah, so okay. This has been a ton of fun. This has been so much fun, but now we're wrapping to the close. So I will remind you that Let's Make a Language broadcasts every 2 weeks, which means that I had not looked at what day that is, which means 2 weeks from now is the 31st. So I will be back with you on the 31st of July, 2 hours, 11 in the morning. And a reminder that everything here is Creative Commons, so go ahead and take any of the stuff that I did that was put in the chat. You can use these words, you can use this process. If you do use the words or you use anything that I've put up on my screen, please put in attribution in whatever format is appropriate for what you're doing. But either way, I hope you have so much fun making languages, and I will see you again in 2 weeks. This has been so much fun.